onto the grid. What's it feel like out there?
Awesome. But how much do we know what's in his head?
Hello and welcome to the F1 Midweek Report. The new 2015 season has started where 2014 left off. Victory once again for Lewis Hamilton. It's the perfect start for Mercedes, with Nico Rosberg finishing behind his teammate to achieve yet another 1-2. Completing the podium was Ferrari new boy Sebastian Vettel. But it was a weekend dominated by on-track reliability problems and off-track threats. To discuss the talking points from Melbourne, I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by former F1 driver David Brabham and F1 technical director Mike Gascoigne. Gents, welcome to the show. Good to see you both. How are you?
Very good, thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to see you. And what are your initial thoughts on 2015?
Well, I always love the start of the season. You know, everyone gets the real buzz about the new cars and drivers. Maybe they've gone to different teams or whatever, and you get there. And of course, when I saw the race, I have to admit, I was a little bit like, I hope it's not going to be like this all year, because it was just kind of fizzled out a little bit too much. Just everything got stretched out, and I think some of the teams aren't quite ready, perhaps, for the season.
And you just think it's going to be Mercedes dominated? Is that something that leaves you feeling slightly flat?
No, I think, you know, they've obviously worked tremendously hard. They've got a fantastic team. They've worked at this for several years to get where they are. And I think everyone expected it from pre-season testing. You know, I love the start of the season. You get all these reports. Everyone's going to be ripping the tarmac up. Everyone's made huge steps. And you get to that first race and see what reality is. But as David said, you know, ultimately it wasn't a great race, and perhaps far more like the race we expected this time last year, with being so unreliable than we expected a year into the new formula, and you know, only having 15 cars start the race, you know, that didn't look great.
Well, more of that slightly later. We'll be assessing all the teams in more detail, but here's what's coming up later in the show. Could Red Bull be on the verge of quitting F1 if the sporting regulations aren't addressed? We try and work out the chasing pack pecking order, as only 3 teams get both drivers to the checkered flag. And as the problems continue for McLaren and Honda, we ask, where do they go from here? Let's start at the top of the grid, though, and Mercedes were untouchable in Australia. So are we on for another year of Mercedes dominance, and is this good for the sport?
Well, I think you're probably going to have a very dominant Mercedes team out there this year. Is it good for the sport? Only if someone like Ferrari can get closer and closer to do battle with Williams as well, because they're the 3 teams that look like they're kind of ahead of the pack at the moment.
I mean, in many ways, you touched on it earlier, teams go through a purple patch, don't they? And perhaps this is just Mercedes. How long it will last, we don't yet know.
Well, I mean, Formula 1's always been cyclic, you know. Everyone has to make their own car, and the simple fact is someone will do it better than the others. And normally teams win for several years because they build up a great engineering team, great management team, get the best drivers, eliminate mistakes, and then they dominate. And it was Williams in the 90s, you know, Ferrari with that great... Red Bull, only you know, a year ago were doing it, won 4 in a row. And you have to say Mercedes, they've got stability, they've built that team, they've kept it together, and, you know, they're going to dominate. What we need is their drivers racing and challenging each other. What you don't need in that situation is one driver dominating, and I think that has to be a little bit of worry looking at Lewis's performance over the weekend.
You think so? You don't think Nico can push him just as hard as he did last season?
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see, but I found it quite fascinating because, you know, Lewis has been living the life of a double world champion, and he's been all over the place, not necessarily from outside perception, working really hard in the team environment, where Nico's kept very quiet. He looks like he's really focused on it. where Lewis actually looks really free. He's just turned up and he has just dominated that weekend. And I think for Nico, I think that's a bit of a shock for him.
Yeah.
And it's whether or not he can recover. And like Mike said, if Lewis goes out there and just dominates the season and there's not a lot to talk about behind it, I think, you know, we could be in a bit of trouble. So I'm hoping that Nico can pick up, which he did do last year, so we'll have to wait and see.
But also, he has been looking good in practice, Nico. In the first 2 practice sessions he did, and then Lewis kind of came good and showed his dominance for the rest of the weekend when it mattered.
Yeah, I think the problem, I mean, we saw it sort of 4 or 5 years ago when the first year Red Bull won the championship. You had Vettel and Webber going hammer and tongs at each other, and a fantastic, you know, season going right up to the wire. And from then on in, once he'd won that first championship, he looked calm. He was always on top, and he had Webber sort of where he wanted him. And Mark, as we know, is a very strong character. And you know, has that happened to Lewis and Nico? Has Lewis now got that monkey off his back, the second championship, and he looked in a great place, didn't he, over the whole weekend?
Sure did. Well, following Mercedes' crushing victory in Australia, the Monday morning back papers were full of Red Bull, who've threatened to quit F1 unless changes are made to the sporting regulations. Helmut Marko, an advisor to Red Bull and Toro Rosso owner Dietrich Mateschitz, said to the Austrian media in Melbourne that we will evaluate the situation again as every year and look into costs and revenues. If we are totally dissatisfied, we could contemplate an F1 exit. There's a danger that Mr. Mateschitz loses his passion for F1. So, gentlemen, do you think this is a genuine threat?
It's difficult to say. I mean, they've always been very vocal. You know, I think a lot of people would sit there and look at them and say, you know, you weren't complaining when you were winning 4 championships in a row, and you didn't mind there being dominance, and you didn't mind all the advantage. Now, their argument is, well, there were rule changes during that period to knock us back, but, you know, we're only 1 race in. They won 3 races last year, you know. They've won 4 out of the last 5 championships. It seems pretty strange at this stage to be threatening to pull out.
Well, what about their relationship with Renault? I mean, Marko also went on to say that if Renault was a dominant engine, they'd still want changes.
I think you've got to take that with a pinch of salt, have you? I mean, sorry, I can't believe that at all. You know, if they had an advantage, they'd want to keep it.
And they're saying that they could leave as early as next year, but surely they would try a different engine supplier before leaving.
Well, I've heard that from Ferrari a few times over the years too. I mean, I think it kind of probably highlights what's going on behind the scenes. To make those kind of statements, there must be, you know, with 4 years of dominance means a team in harmony. Red Bull don't seem to be a team in harmony at the moment like Mercedes is, and so there are reasons behind that where we don't necessarily know because we're not on the inside. So when you come up with statements like that, it generally is because there's a bit of trouble behind the scenes.
I mean, absolutely. Going back to that point where, you know, teams win because they've got stability and they build, you know, Adrian Newey saying he's doing different things. A lot of the reports over the last year or 2 have been Red Bull staff leaving and all of that. And so, you know, I think you're right. We don't know, but there's other reasons behind there as well. And, you know, it's tough when that's happening to rebuild that team and get back to the top. And then, of course, if your engine manufacturer isn't performing as well, and clearly Renault aren't, they haven't made the same step that Ferrari did, then it's going to be difficult. It's going to be tough.
Well, you're heading up Project Brabham with the intention of getting into F1. Would you come into the sport under the current regulations?
Well, probably not right now. No, I mean, I think, you know, from a cost point of view, to compete in Formula 1, you know, for what it costs and what you can bring in terms of revenue, as we've seen by the teams already, you know, I mean, you know, obviously the 2 teams that went out last year, okay, one's been resurrected, but just. And of course, you know, Force India were having problems getting to the first race, which means, you know, they've been having problems throughout the whole year, which, and for me, that's a team that I was slightly surprised to see they weren't as quick.
Yeah.
You know, they were behind, and the fact they were behind, and you hear all the stories they're trying to get to the first race, means they've not been able to develop the car. And I think that whole scenario is spreading throughout the grid of Formula 1, and I think that's the biggest issue right now. So for me, thinking about Brabham coming back into Formula 1, I think I'd like to see Brabham come a little bit further down the road when some of this mess is kind of cleared up a bit.
I mean, they only tell us what they want us to know, but at what point does their relationship with Renault become untenable? We've heard murmurings for a long time now.
Yeah, I mean, to be so vocal about it, I mean, you contrast that with McLaren and Honda, where it wasn't a great race, but they've been very together in terms of what they're saying in the press. To be this vocal about it, for a team that supplies you with 3 engines, let's not forget that. You know, Renault only supplying 2 teams, the 2 Red Bull teams, very vocal about it. You've got to think that something's going to happen there.
Well, Sebastian Vettel obviously left Red Bull to go to Ferrari after what was a difficult year for him last year. Do you think that was the right time to go? It clearly looks like a masterstroke now.
It definitely does. I mean, I think back then you'd probably say, did he make the right decision? A bit like Lewis making the decision leaving McLaren to Mercedes. But yeah, I mean, it was fantastic to see Ferrari competitive again, somewhat competitive, obviously not as quick as Mercedes, but the car looked really quite good to drive. It was very drivable from a driver's point of view looking at it. He looks happy. The whole team looks like it's kind of got their act together a bit more. So that's positive for Formula 1 too.
And it seems like Seb's got his mojo back. You know, podium, the first for Ferrari since China last year. Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. He'd have been very disappointed with last year, you know, being blown away by a comparative rookie in a team that he was meant to dominate. And I think, as David said, it's great news to see Ferrari sort of becoming cohesive, you know, under, you know, Maurizio Arrivabene. You can only say it in an Italian accent, can't you? But I was very pleased to see the interview with the technical director afterwards, where he was looking very relaxed, because that will have bought him time. You know, because he'll be a guy under pressure.
It's a pressure cooker running Ferrari, isn't it?
And Ferrari traditionally chop and change, you know, the press, the Tifosi are on their back, you know, and if you chop and change, you don't get anywhere. And I really hope that that is a real period of stability from now, and they can build on this race. You know, good drivers, you know, Kimi again would seem to be more competitive. So hopefully it's a good time coming up for us, because Formula 1, with Mercedes where they are, Formula 1 needs it now.
Yeah, definitely.
They need someone pushing them hard. And is it Arrivabene who can take the credit for the way the weekend went? Is it down to Vettel?
No,
who do you think takes the credit? Is it,
what, in terms
as
of
you
the,
say, it's like a cohesive effort?
Well, yeah, this stems from work way before that race weekend. It's just, that's the result of it, and you know, the stability within the team, which you have to say, considering they were quite out of control, I thought, you know, certainly last year, they've got their act together pretty quickly, and they've come there to Melbourne. And, you know, having Vettel there for sure has given everybody a little bit of a lift, you know, and all those little lifts throughout the team, you know what it's like. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. But I think if you're going to narrow it down to one person, I'd say whoever's leading the engine department now. I mean, James Allison has done a good job, but the step they've made on the engine, and you saw it with Sauber, you saw it throughout the Ferrari teams. So the guy who runs the engine department needs a pat on the back for me.
Gold star. OK, thanks for now. Join us after the break as we look at the rest of the grid, in particular a difficult yet surprising weekend for Sauber and more misery for McLaren.
So we've lost Kevin Magnussen, we've lost Danny Kvyat, and we've lost Valtteri Bottas. It's lights out, and away we go.
Utter silliness going on down there in turn 1.
Someone crashed me.
Stellar job NASA's doing there for Sauber.
And they're wheel to wheel.
Lovely job, gentlemen. Keep making life difficult for him.
Oh, well done, sir. 2.5 seconds between Hamilton and Rosberg. The gamble by Ferrari to stay out has well and truly paid off here, but that fight is not done and dusted yet. Oh dear.
Come on, Nico, get on it. Give it a race.
Take the car because it's smoking, I think.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Did you leave the wheel loose? I'm sorry, Kimi.
It's Lewis Hamilton that wins the Australian Grand Prix.
That was the 30th Silver Arrows victory. Well done.
Incredible job, guys.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, man.
Hello and welcome back to the F1 Midweek Report. Another race dominated by Mercedes, but for many teams this weekend was hampered by unreliability. Now, chaps, this is something, as you touched on earlier, that we expected last year, but not this year, surely.
No, I mean, it was a real surprise. I mean, we'd seen teams struggling in pre-season testing, and Honda you can perhaps expect it from with McLaren. But some of the other teams, it was a big surprise.
The grid was down to 15 before the lights went out, and only 11 cars finished the race. Sauber, who didn't score a point last season, claimed 14 in Melbourne. So was this performance a one-off, or do you think Sauber are coming good now?
I think, you know, obviously with the lack of finishers, it looked better than it was. But, you know, Felipe Nasr, to finish where he finished, you know, in front of the cars he finished, in front of a Red Bull and all of that, he'd have got points if the good cars had finished. So I think for Sauber, you know, for them it was a real indication, along with Ferrari, of where that engine went, you know, because they haven't had the money or the time to develop that car. But, you know, for them, what a dream start, given the political problems they had, and that's made their season for them. I mean, absolutely.
Many would be destabilised by what's going on in the background. Felipe Nasr, you have to say, many people put him down as their driver of the day, and he was criticised beforehand because Jolyon Palmer beat him in GP2. Do you think he's silenced those critics now? Because it's a fantastic drive from him.
I hope so. I mean, you know, he's a good driver. You know, and the weekend showed that. He made, well, I didn't see him make a mistake, in a sense. And he's big pressure, first Grand Prix, especially running, you know, in the top 5, and also knowing, you have to get those points for the team, because you know how valuable that is. I thought he did a brilliant job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what more do we know about Guido van der Garde and why he wasn't driving at the weekend? He came to a settlement as late as Saturday?
I mean, it seems so. I mean, obviously, someone like Guido, who was a reserve driver for them last year, he'd have only been a reserve driver for them because he's driven before in Formula 1 if he was going to be a race driver this year. And obviously, the team felt they had to take a couple of drivers who maybe had more money. But, you know, if the guy had a valid contract, and clearly he did, you've got to resolve that. The shame was for Formula 1 that you're doing that on the Saturday of a Grand Prix weekend, because you must know that that's coming along.
It's a tough old game, isn't it? Well, let's look further down the grid at the Toro Rosso rookies, Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz. How impressed were you by them this weekend?
Pretty impressive, actually. I mean, I think it highlights also, for me, that the preparation you can get now as a driver leading up to your first Grand Prix is quite a lot, you know, with the testing, the simulator time and things, and also the gap between Formula 3 and Formula 1 is not as big as perhaps what it was years ago. So, you know, these guys are able to jump in, they're talented, and I think it's going to be exciting who comes out on top with that battle, because they're two very good drivers.
I mean, I heard that the average age on the grid was 27, which is really depressing. Max is only 17. We can expect big things from him, surely.
Yeah, but it is amazing, as David said, these are complex cars to drive now. You've got all the energy recovery systems, you've got to be changing the brake balance and that. It's not like in the old days where you just jumped in and, OK, a Formula 1 car had more power, but, you know, you were still doing
exactly the same things.
So these cars, but it does show, as Dave made the point, how they've managed with all the simulators, how they can train these guys. And you look at, as I say, Felipe Nasr, really under pressure. You know, after 4 or 5 laps of that race, when he had a train of cars behind him, you all thought, well, he's done pretty well, and now here they go. And he never looked, he never made a mistake, he never put a foot wrong, he never pushed the wrong button.
Actually, he pulled away when he needed to. He pulled away when he had to.
He sort of stabilised it for 3 or 4 laps, and then you could see him get confidence and just go. And, you know, that's impressive that rookies can do that.
OK, well, Williams started the weekend thinking that they were the best of the rest, but only Felipe Massa crossed the line to finish 4th. Now, worryingly for the team, Valtteri Bottas withdrew prior to the race after tearing a disc in his lower back. So how much of a concern is this going to be for Valtteri and the whole team? He's only 25.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strange thing to happen. I mean, I've never seen something like that. And, you know, a tear in the disc, if the disc is moved, you know, that isn't necessarily easy to put right either. And to see that happening in qualifying, that's strange. And you really saw how Williams missed him, because last year he was their go-to man. You know, he got the podiums, and actually, you know, he was probably the one that they'd have hoped would have been able to get that podium position off Sebastian Vettel. So if he's not fit, that's a big issue for them.
It's nothing. I mean, you've got to worry about back injuries, really. It could hamper you for the whole season. He's not going to be fit for Malaysia, is he? Particularly such a physical, demanding race as Malaysia.
Yeah, I guess it really depends on how bad his disc is. I mean, I've had trouble with my discs over the years, and he's a fit lad, and he's still got problems. That's bigger than a normal problem. That's something quite major.
And so with your own back problems, how long did it keep you out of the sport?
Well, it didn't really keep me out, but if I had a back
problem, you see,
well,
you?
no, it's not that.
Hey?
It's just it's learning how to deal with it. And of course, your training and your core is really important. I have two bulging discs in my back, so if my fitness drops, that's when I get back problem. But he's a fit young lad. I mean, I'm nearly 50. I mean, but for him,
stop it.
No, but for
Don't
him,
believe
he's young, he's fit, and last year he was just unbelievable. And to have that problem out, he must be gutted. I can't tell you as a driver how much he.
I know, and he must have been in a lot of pain to pull out, because he's not one to give in easily, is he?
Yeah, you saw the pictures of getting out after qualifying, and that's very strange to see a guy that fit, that strong. And he's done all the pre-season testing, he's done his lap sims, his race distances, everything. It's very strange to have that.
Now, the big question is, if he doesn't race in Malaysia, who will take his place?
Well, we don't know, but we know it won't be.
Explain yourself, because I don't get this. I don't get why you would have a reserve driver, Susie Wolff, and a development driver, Alex Lynn, and not use them. What's the point?
Well, it's become very typical in Formula 1. I mean, we had the issue with Lotus a couple of years ago when I think Valsecchi was their reserve driver, and they put Heikki Kovalainen.
When Kimi was out.
Yeah, and if teams aren't, why are people paying to be reserve drivers if they're not going to step in and do the race? And it would be great for Formula 1 to have a female driver driving in a race, but it's just not good for the sport if reserve drivers aren't used. How are the people going to get the experience?
Well, I think it probably tells you more of the state of Formula 1, because they're so reliant on the money, and for the reserve drivers, as they think they are, when something like this comes up, you really know then how much you're valued within the team if you're going to be put in the car.
It just feels like they don't have any faith in them. Do you have faith in Williams as a team, that they can get on the podium, that they can get a win this year?
Certainly a podium. Yeah, I think certainly a podium. Yes, they're too far away at the moment from a win, but you never know what can happen in races.
Well, Bottas had to watch the Australian Grand Prix from the sidelines, and he wasn't the only one. McLaren's Fernando Alonso also missed the race following his crash during testing in Barcelona. Kevin Magnussen stepped in to replace the Spaniard, but didn't make it past the formation lap after suffering from an engine blowout. Now, David, how would Alonso feel looking on? I mean, that must have been incredibly tough for him, particularly now he's down an engine as well for the rest of the season.
I don't know if it'd be that bad, to be honest with you. When you see the performance of the McLarens at the moment, he's probably thinking, actually, I'm probably better off out of it. But
he might decide that he's not fit for the next couple.
Maybe he's not fit for the next couple. No, but seriously, I mean, as a driver, he'll be obviously he is now part of McLaren. So his heart is there, and he'll want to see the team do well. Obviously, incredibly frustrating for him that he can't be there to help the team move forward. But also, I know at the back of his mind, he's looking at the performance of the car, and that's not what he was expecting when he signed that contract. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah.
So what can the team do to move forward? I mean, Alonso will still be giving his input from the sidelines, I'm sure, but it's going to take a bit more than that, isn't it?
Well, I mean, Honda have to up their game. Now, I'm not so sure it's as bad as it maybe looked in Australia. I think they were being very, very conservative. Obviously it's a lot warmer in Australia than they've had in pre-season testing, and if they're worried about reliability, don't want to blow up engines early on, maybe worried about certain components in the engine, then they're going to turn the whip down and be conservative. And I think because it's a new relationship, they can get away with that for a while.
But it's not like they haven't known it's coming.
Absolutely.
So it's not really a new relationship, is it?
No, but it's, going racing is tough, and, there's nothing like going racing to solve engineering problems, because, you've got to get on with it now. But, they'll have got a race finish, which would have been very important, and I'm sure they turned it all the way down just to make sure they had an engine at the end of the race to have a look at and see what's going on in there, and the hope is that they can get on top of those problems and turn it up.
So a race finish, yes, but Jensen is the only driver to be outside of the points. I mean, he would have been very frustrated with that, surely. I mean, we heard before the season started that they said they wouldn't start the race season with a race-winning car, but they could finish it with one. Can you see them winning a race this year?
No. I mean, I felt for Jensen. I mean, you know, when you saw some of the comparisons of the lap between him and Lewis, I mean, it's like he was in a Formula 3 car or something.
Yeah.
Just the gap was just massive. They've had to turn that thing down so much just to even finish, which, you know, at an early stage development, just getting to the end of that race, they'll get a massive amount of data from that. Whether they tried something different with Kevin's car, you know, and then obviously it had a problem. Who knows? We don't know what that situation is. But boy, that's a tough relationship. But you said earlier that it's not a new relationship. Well, to me, it actually is. The two names might have come together before, but all the people involved will be completely different. So getting those to work together and plan ahead and get all the systems in place, it is very much a new relationship.
OK, pecking order. We know where Mercedes are, but where are the others behind them? Is it Ferrari that's going to be pushing them the hardest?
I think we need to wait a couple of races. I think Williams can do a better job, especially if Bottas is driving as well. They'll be scoring podiums. I think it's absolutely what we need, isn't it? We need Ferrari and Williams behind Mercedes to be going at it, you know, in a ding-dong battle. Because I mean, that's what was really kind of disappointing about Australia. You know, you can have two cars out in front, but you've got to be able to see battles all the way down the field and people racing. And we didn't really have that. And with Ferrari and Williams, we need to see that.
It wasn't long ago that we were saying Ferrari were completely out of it, and look where they are now. So things can change quite quickly, can't they? Well, time has beaten us. My thanks to Mike Gascoigne and David Brabham for joining. And for further thoughts and opinions on this week's Talking Points, our very own Martin Brundle has written a column which is available now on all Sky Sports digital platforms. Next up is Malaysia, where last season Lewis Hamilton beat Nico Rosberg by 17 seconds to lay down an early ominous marker in the fight for the championship. Will history repeat itself next week? We'll see. Bye-bye.
Enjoy Sky Sports F1 Live. On all screens, on the go, and the best bits on demand.